while ago, the Z4 started to overheat randomly, so of course I looked for a video detailing how to replace the water pump. YouTube had a good number of options for the N54 powered E90s, probably some for the E60s. Alas, nothing for the Z4 specifically, and I was pretty sure there'd be differences in how they were set up. Being the nice guy that I am, I figured I would document my process, learnings along the way. To note, my engine bay is different. I have a relocated coolant overflow, and my inlets are also relocated, so be aware of this. While I have an N54 powered Z4, I think the other motors will all be basically the same, but I make no guarantees. Anyways, let's start off with the basics of what you need. Everything we're going to be purchasing is from FCP Euro. If you guys don't already purchase stuff from FCP Euro, you don't already know about their unlimited lifetime warranty on their parts, like on engine oil. Like you can return engine oil, which is crazy. You should be looking into this. Anyways, first things first here, you're obviously going to need the water pump. I went with the all metal water pump as well as the thermostat and a gallon of coolant. It was expensive, but hopefully worth it. I also recommend doing the drain plug. You cannot see the drain plug without removing, at the very least, the intercooler. And it is plastic, so it's a great idea to buy it ahead of time so you don't get stuck finding out you do have a bad drain plug and having to wait for one to come in the mail. The other piece that I would look at is the use hose between the water pump and the thermostat. This is basically one of the hardest pieces to get to. If you don't replace it now and it starts leaking, you're going to have to essentially redo this entire process to replace that piece. The Mickey Mouse hose is another one. The common area for these to break is actually this part mounts to the front of the block. It's actually not that hard to get to. It's made out of plastic. What you want to do is purchase the one with the aluminum flange on it, but that's not the big deal. You can do that pretty much at any time. The big deal is that on the back end of that hose, if you want to get to that, it's attached to the back side of the thermostat. So I would do that now. The final piece is something, unfortunately, I didn't realize I wanted to do it, but the coolant feed pipe. This is what moves coolant from the water pump into the block, or vice versa. I'm not sure how it flows. But this piece, if you end up needing to replace this, you're going to have to remove everything to get to it again. This is all under the turbo, gets very hot, probably prone to wearing out. There are other, while you're in there, that you may want to consider as well. This is kind of the stuff that you're going to find as you're taking things apart. For me specifically, I found that I was leaking oil onto the front of my block. It's a common situation that oil leaks onto the serpentine belt. The serpentine belt comes off of the crank pulley and then gets sucked into the engine via the crankshaft. It's not necessarily catastrophic, but very expensive to get that figured out and fixed. So I ended up ordering a kit that had the oil filter housing gasket, as well as other ancillary components. Everything is clean to this day. So I think that did fix it. But you're going to want to be looking for these things along the way as you start tearing apart your engine bay. So with those pieces out of the way, let's go ahead and dig into the process of what it takes to get this thing removed. First thing to remove is this guy. There are 4 bolts, 3, 4. They're all 8 mil. And this guy comes right up. To get access to remove this fan, you have to remove this radiator support here. It is, I believe, T30s. Correct. I don't know how many there are. We'll see in a second. Also a good idea to have a magnet to get out these deep ones. I think it's only 4. It's 6 T30s. This line is clipped under here. I already undid this one. This just pulls forward. T25, this clip, which you pull out and pull up, and this removed. You can remove this entire shroud. Come in here, get this one, pull it out. There's a T25 right there. However, on this side, there is a clip. It is down there. What you want to do is get your finger on it and pull out. It's very simple. Okay, now we need to remove this underbody shielding. It's
going to be a ton of 8mm bolts. So get to it. To note, there's actually a plastic piece that goes under the transmission there. It's currently not installed, so expect that to normally be there. There'll be a few more bolts to deal with. We'll call that one. It's gonna be 15 to 16 bolts, give or take a bunch. You make it look, you can find this guy down. 5mm Allen wrench from a different project. You're also gonna have to remove this and this. If we look at this a little bit closer, and I can see 18mm. 1, 2, 3. I think there's actually a 4. Oh yeah, right there, 4. Once these guys are out of the way, the reason you have to remove these is to get this guy out of the way. So 4 18s, slide them out from the plastic. This sway bar completely limits your access. 2 13s here, 2 13s here, and then this should swing down and out of the way. To note, the steering rack has right here an electronic component to it. This is dissimilar to all the other N54 powered cars basically, which all have hydraulic powered steering racks. This thing, you can see, sticks way out from the actual rack itself. This is very much in the way of your water pump, which is right here. It's this big metal piece here, and the thermostat, which is right next to it. To remove this intercooler, there's a bolt here. You're gonna have to use something SAE to get that off. There's 2 of these, one on each side. Those are the only 2 bolts holding this on. There are the 2 worm gears holding on the intercooler. Charge pipes.
With the intercooler unbolted, pull it down and away to remove from the engine bay. Once this is out of the way, you now have access to the coolant petcock on the driver's side of the radiator. Take a large Phillips head screwdriver and loosen it. Make sure go up to the top of the engine bay, unscrew your coolant overflow cap to let the radiator drain a little bit faster. But also keep in mind, even once this is all done draining, there's still going to be coolant in the system. So when you remove the hoses from the water pump and the thermostat, be careful because coolant will come out from those. Next thing, you need to remove the passenger side front brace to allow the water pump and the thermostat to be pulled forward. This brace is held on with 3 bolts. One of them is at the front of this cross member. The other one sits on top of the passenger side frame rail. And then the third one is on the inner passenger fender. Once you get that pulled out, we can move over to the workbench and talk through the removal of the thermostat and the water pump a little bit more clearly.
When you remove the thermostat and water pump, one of the main differences you're going to see between the Z4 and any other N54 powered vehicle is that the Z4 has an electric rack. A lot of the electrical components for that power steering rack sit directly in the way of your water pump and thermostat. What you want to do to remove things: number 1, the electrical connector for the water pump, which is here. Then the electrical connector for the thermostat, which is right here. Essentially, the only hose that you have to access from underneath the vehicle is this U-hose that's right here that connects the water pump to the thermostat. You only need to disconnect the one piece of it. This right here is the worm gear that's attached to the hose that is the U-hose that connects the thermostat to the water pump. So you'll have access to it. You can use a flathead, or you can use, I believe this is a 6mm, and then you can simply loosen it like so. And once you have loosened it, you can go ahead and remove this guy. Once you have this removed, I like to keep these bolts installed while you're doing that. But now that that's off, now that this connector is off, you can remove these, which are the only 2 bolts holding the thermostat to the water pump. These are 2 10mm, very easy to remove. And there's nothing actually holding it into place except for a couple of other hoses that are still attached to it. But, geez Louise, once you get this guy off, we're gonna come around to the front side. You can now pull this forward. There are only these 2 hoses and this, which are still connected. You can pull this forward You can easily disconnect this hose, regardless of whether or not you can pull this forward, but you pull it forward to remove this one. You do not need to worry about removing this. This is the Mickey Mouse hose. This can stay on. So then you can fully remove this. Once that's removed, there are only 3 bolts holding the water pump into place. One of them is going to be on top, and then these 2 guys are the ones that are accessible underneath the vehicle. And then the only other thing you need to worry about getting to, which actually is difficult, is this is the main water pump feed line here. I don't know if this is how they're installed as stock or if this is how the previous owner did it on my car, but looking at it once again from the top, which you can't access it from the top, but this will give you the perspective. This worm gear clamp was aimed like this, and the only way that I found to be able to get access to it was to take a 6mm, fish it up in here. So once you have it on there, that's how you slowly take this thing off, and then you can pull that completely off, and then it will come off this feed line. You do not have to remove this U-hose to get it off. You only have to remove this side to get it off the thermostat, but this side can remain clamped. Now you can fully pull this out, and it's out. Reinstall is essentially the opposite of that. When you reinstall, you're going to want to keep these 2 lines on here like this. You should have purchased a new Mickey Mouse hose. You should have purchased a new U-bend here. You should also have a new thermostat, a new water pump. So all these will be new. You can remove them, orient them exactly how they should be. And then you're going to want to tighten these 2. I left these on here to show you guys. These come off together and they will get reinstalled together. There's no need to worry about orientation of these worm gears because you're not removing them. What you want to do when it comes time to reinstall, and once again we are looking from the top forward into the engine bay, you're going to take this guy and slip him into the general area where the water pump sits. The first thing you're going to solve for now is the orientation and placement of this worm gear. The water pump feed line is already going to be in place. However, I didn't like how it was installed like this on mine. It made it kind of a pain to get to the worm gear. So what I did is I found that actually if I turned it and had it like this, you can install a little extension on here and you now can access this from the front of the car. There's a ton of space up here to access this. So what you want to do, put this in place. You're going to want to slip this onto the feed hose first. It's only possible to do it when this is not attached. Once this is sitting on the feed hose, not tight, just sitting there, you're going to want to connect this to the feed hose. Then you push it down the feed hose into place, come in front here and tighten it on. This is way easier to do than the way that it was installed previously on mine. Next thing you're gonna wanna do is take your thermostat and get him into place. So essentially setting him right there. Then next thing you wanna worry about is the orientation of your worm gear here. So what you're gonna do is get it loose enough that you can simply slide it on to this U, and then you're going to take this and you're going to install it in place, get it basically how you want it to, and then you're going to orient your clamp. I should have done this a little bit better. So you got your clamp oriented, have it facing downward because that's how it's accessible. Remember, this is now the underside of the car, and you're installed. That's those 2 pieces installed. You have this U-joint in place. You have this is now connected to the feed hose. While you still have this guy pretty loose, actually both these guys are loose, you're gonna wanna pull this guy forward. When you pull this forward, that gives you access to reconnect this hose that's right here. Once that's installed, you let it sit back how it was. You can now go ahead and install this front hose if you want to as well. This is easy to get to, it's right at the front of the engine. Once you have those things basically in place, you're gonna wanna come down here and get your water pump to thermostat bolts reinstalled. You're gonna have a little bit of pressure working against you with all these lines in place. Replace this electrical connector replace this electrical connector. You can now go in, put the bolts in there, as well as the single bolt up here. It's not hard. It's just kind of tedious and annoying and tight. I apologize I didn't do this in the car, but I thought this would be a lot more visible and easier to see anyways.
Once you've finished installing the thermostat, water pump, and have reconnected all the cooling lines, fill up the system with a 50-50 mix of coolant and water. If you have a battery charger, attach it to the positive terminal in the engine bay and one of the strut mount bolts nearby and set it to charge. Then screw the overflow cap back onto the container. Get into the driver's seat and put the key into the on position, being sure not to start the car.
Turn it on once and then turn it on twice. You don't want the car to start, but you want it to be in the full on position. Make sure this is set to max. Make sure this is set to max. Make sure this is set to 1, the lowest setting of the fan. And then you're going to go ahead and hold down the throttle pedal for 10 seconds.
For the next 12 minutes, the water pump will automatically bleed the cooling system for you. Be sure to check regularly for any leaks that may be occurring under or in the engine bay. Once the 12 minutes are up, open up your overflow cap to make sure that the coolant is at the correct level. When you reassemble, it's essentially the exact opposite of how you pull it out. There's one area that I would recommend you do slightly differently. After I removed the intercooler, I ended up removing the charge pipe that connects the intercooler to the throttle body. I didn't want to have to deal with trying to connect both sides of the intercooler inlet and outlet, as well as pushing it into the studs that hold the intercooler in place. I thought it would just be too much of a pain to try to do all those things at once. Just having one less intercooler pipe to worry about and to work with, I feel like makes this much easier. Start your car up and let it warm up to operating temperature. As you can see, we're chilling at 94. It usually sits around 200 degrees at normal operating temp, so we'll wait for this to get to 200, see if it goes over. If it doesn't, then we're good. I like to back the cars out of the garage to prevent it from building up.
Get that booty and out.
So she's been idling for about 20 minutes now in the garage, and it's just about 190 degrees. I won't know until I'm actually out on the road driving on the freeway, but this looks like everything's good to go. Yeah, those are all the tips and tricks. So good luck. Hopefully you can figure all this stuff out. If not, I don't know, ask questions on here.